Okay. But yeah, wanted to say welcome. Thank you for attending our Let Duval Vote campaign kickoff, one of many events to drum up support and to restore the early voting sites at Edward Waters University, as well as the University of North Florida. I'm going to kick it off by just reviewing the agenda. And then for folks who don't know me, my name is Ariel. I'm the Florida State Coordinator with the Campus Vote Project, based in St. Pete, but do work all across the state. But here's our agenda for tonight. So I'm going to review the agenda, talk about our goals for this event. And we will then get into an overview of what is happening in Florida when it comes to voting rights, what is happening in Duval County, and then the timeline when it comes to the early voting advocacy that's been done. We'll then get into the importance of the media and letters to the editor. Brad Ashwell from All Voting is Local is going to be taking on that. Then you'll have the opportunity to take a direct action by writing a letter to the editor during this meeting. And then we'll wrap up from there and talk about next steps and ways to stay involved in this advocacy. So to first get started, just talk about the goals. So what are we hoping to accomplish in an hour? So the first is we just want to get our heads wrapped around what is happening in Duval County. So we're all clear on what are the facts, who are the people, and what is going on. Second is taking that direct action. So for some of you, this might be your first political action. It might be your first action when it comes to this early voting advocacy. But we are going to make sure that you know how to first just write a letter to the editor, which is an incredibly important opinion piece in a newspaper. So generally how to write about that, but then also how to write one about this action and this work specifically. And then lastly, learn about those upcoming actions and ways to stay involved with all of this work. So with that being said, we are going to dive into what is happening in Florida, what is happening in Duval County. Feel free, I mean, again, this obviously is being recorded, but if folks want to take pictures of certain slides, or if you want to, have a notebook in front of you to take notes on this, feel free to do so. But I will pass it off to Nutesh, the Florida Deputy State Coordinator with the Campus Vote Project, to start us off there.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. So we're going to go into talking about what's happening in Florida first, and then specifically in Duval County, and then we're going to look at the timeline. So to start off with what's happening in Florida, a lot is happening, especially when it comes to voting rights. Before we get into specifics, I just want to take some time for everyone to read the headlines, and then we'll come back. So some headlines that stick out to me in particular are voters with disabilities face new ballot restrictions ahead of midterms, or Florida officials appeal federal ruling that struck down part of 2021 election law, or even city council in Florida racially gerrymanders districts despite Black voter outrage. So like I said, a lot is happening in Florida when it comes to voting rights. In 2021, we saw the passage of Senate Bill 90. And in 2022, we saw the passage of Senate Bill 524. So we're experiencing a lot of disorganized redistricting and gerrymandering, and that doesn't even begin to cover all of the issues that are happening statewide. So getting into a little bit of what's happening into Duval County specifically, before we get into that, I'm gonna take some time to just let you guys read the headlines again. And these are pretty crazy headlines, discussing voter fraud and intimidation and filing suits. There's a long history of corruption and weakening of political power for people of color, especially in Duval County. We can talk about when the city of Jacksonville was consolidated within the greater county in 1968. We can talk about the news headlines right here in 2000. And then we can talk about what's happening today. So when the Jacksonville City Council back in March voted 17-1 to pass a voting district map with racially gerrymandered districts, we can talk about the broken promises of early voting sites on college campuses. And to get into a timeline of what that looks like, in July of 2018, a federal court struck down Florida's unconstitutional ban on college and university campus early voting locations, citing a stark pattern of discrimination. In August of 2018, following the court's ruling and after weeks of intense advocacy from activists and community orgs, Supervisor of Elections Mike Hogan eventually agreed to establish early voting sites at UNF and EWU. 91% of the voters who used Edward Water University's site in 2018 were Black. In 2020, Hogan refused to restore either campus polling site, citing low turnout while failing to mention the sites were added 2 months before Election Day. In 2020, Duval once again had disproportionately high vote by mail ballot rejection rates among voters under the age of 30. The most logical way to remedy these disparities is by restoring student access to in-person early voting. And now that we've talked about the specific problems, let's get into our solution. And I'm going to pass that back to Ariel.
Yep, I got it. So now, when we come to think about our solution, we want to envision how we want our greater society to function. How do we want our counties and our cities to function? And kind of overall our vision, so our solution is when Floridians can exercise their freedom to vote regardless of where they live, work, or go to class. It sends a message that their voice is respected and valued. But greater than that, voting should just generally be easy and accessible for eligible voters to make their voices heard. So with that, our overall goal, so through all of our advocacy, through all of this work, our goal is to restore the early voting locations on the campuses of Edward Waters University and the University of North Florida. But that kind of begs the question, why early voting and why are we focusing on early voting on campus? First, just generally speaking, providing campuses with early voting sites sends a clear message to the young people of Duval County that their voice and their vote is respected and valued. But there are really, we kind of boil it down to 3 reasons why early voting and early voting on campuses is particularly important. First, we look at just the ongoing attacks on voting rights. So the Florida State Legislature has created new obstacles for vote by mail. So now it's even more important that we ensure Floridians have as many opportunities to make their voices heard and have the in-person early voting options. The second is when it comes to pandemic voting. So early voting gives voters the option to cast their ballots without facing the crowds and long lines on Election Day. It is just an important mechanism to facilitate safe voting during a public health crisis. And then lastly, which is a really important point, is that campus early voting sites serve not only students, but the communities that they reside in. In particular, we can look at Edward Waters University, where it was cited that having an early voting site on the campus was way more of an accessible site to vote at that didn't require transportation. And one study found that 77.6% of the voters who used the Edward Waters site in 2018 were over the age of 30, while 56.2% of those that used the UNF site were over the age of 30. This really just clearly demonstrates that these early voting sites are helpful for students, but they're helpful for the greater community. But we know that early voting has just been instrumental throughout Florida in expanding voter participation and ensuring that voters have greater options as to when and where they can vote. So with that being said, before we get into kind of our strategies and our tactics, I do want to pass it off to 2 students to talk about their own experience and the work that they've been doing. So I'll pass over to Chauncey at Edward Waters and then to Sam at UNF.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Chauncey Maurice Whaley. I'm a communication scholar in my third year at Edward Waters University. At first, I started off as a campus vote project fellow in the year 2020, 2021. And if all we understand, that was at the time of the national election in 2020. One of the things that we did in our campus vote project plan was to vote, organize a Souls to the Polls march from our student activity center or our sub over to the Shell Suite on the day of election. And the reason why is because at that particular time, early voting was not available to us at that location unless we go to a location at a greater distance at the university, at the time college. What we discovered today that we went over to the Shell Suite, students, not all students was able to cast their ballots at that day because the way they had to set up as far as voting precincts, you can be at the same campus, live in a different dorm, but send you over to a different precinct. Some had to go to the Beaver Street Enterprise Center, which at the last minute we had to get individuals sheltered over to that location for the day that we voted for them to vote. And what we realize is this is an inconvenience because not all students have transportation. So it's been my goal since then to make sure that we have an early voting site at Edward Waters University so that the student body who desires to wish to vote won't have to go a long distance away from the campus, but the Shell Suite building that's at our campus will be the primary site. I don't agree with the supervisor elections decision back at that particular time, because if you want to take away the power of a student 18 years old who waited long enough to become a voter, to exercise their process, at least afford an opportunity to at least do it on their campus, not only where they are growing as a scholar, but become a more of a productive individual in our society. And I personally believe the best way that you can do that is use your power to vote. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak this evening.
That was great. I definitely agree. I think, over here at UNF, I'm a senior. My name is Sam Morden. I am an English major and I'm graduating with my BA in just a couple weeks, which is really exciting. I'm going on to graduate school. And, I can remember during the midterms, casting my vote at the polling place on campus. And it was very convenient. I don't drive. I'm legally blind. And so me and along with a lot of other students don't have transportation to the polls, as well as students are not always aware of, these kind of technicalities, like which precinct you're in, where to go. They might be unfamiliar with the area and have a hard time navigating around Jacksonville and knowing where to go. They also, have other issues as well with transportation and figuring out where to go. And so we just want to make sure that, our government understands that college students are valuable citizens and that they deserve to vote and that they deserve to have civic engagement. And we also need, our college and, community to come together and try to encourage voting and make sure that young people are heard throughout the community. So yeah, I just started working as a field deputy organizer back in 2019 with the Florida Democratic Party, and I worked with them for a while, like throughout 2020, where the focus was voting by mail, which I think still is a really great option, but we absolutely need these voting places on campus, and we need them throughout Jacksonville that have been taken away, due to bias and prejudice and mismanagement, frankly, especially with, putting these polling places in 2 months before and then complaining about a low turnout rate, particularly. So I'm really excited about, the strategies that we have, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done. And I really appreciate, everyone who has contributed and those who will contribute in the future. So thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Sam and Chauncey, for talking a little bit about the work that you've been doing and why you care so much about continuing this advocacy. Well, I want to wrap up this just kind of talking about what is going on, our solution, our goals, and why early voting. But I wanted to leave it on this note of early voting is just downright popular in Duval County. So you can see here in 2018, 43% of voters chose to vote early in person. In 2020, it was over 50%. So not only is this a critical resource for folks, both the general community and students, but it is generally just the choice that many folks just make at the end of the day on how to make their voice heard. But with that being said, I want to get into, now we understand kind of the brief context, but who's the person who's actually going to make the decision at the end of the day if this can happen? That would be our supervisor of elections, Mike Hogan. So Hogan assumed office in 2015. His current term ends on January 3rd, 2023. I gotta say, Supervisor Hogan is not being an accessible or responsive public servant. Community members and activists began attempts to discuss reinstating these early voting sites long before the 2020 elections, but the supervisor refused to meet until weeks before early voting began, when there was no time to add additional voting locations. But additionally, again, is just refusing to meet with advocates who have been reaching out to him throughout 2021 to discuss this matter. But I'll leave this slide with just the Florida statute, which literally lays out that the supervisor of elections may designate any of these locations as early voting sites. So this is our guy that's making the decision. And so how are we going to get him to do it? I'll get into a little bit of our strategy and our tactics, and then we'll hop into what are we doing today to get started. So I think the first thing is important to point out is there are two ways that we will strategize with a particular campaign. You have your inside game and you have your outside game. You want to think of inside game as your lobby meetings, those boardroom meeting discussions, the email chains. That is your inside game. Your outside game refers to press conferences, protests. They're often those public displays of support for or against a particular thing. So our strategy when coming at this work for early voting sites kind of takes both of those buckets to make this happen. The first is I wanted to lay out the inside kind of game that has been happening around this work. Both the interim president of UNF and the president of Edward Waters have voiced their support for their campuses serving as early voting sites. On the left is acknowledgement of the email that was sent from UNF's interim president to SOE Hogan in 2022. And on the right is an email that President Faison, the president of Edward Waters University, sent to Supervisor Hogan in 2020. So it is clear when you look at the leadership of these universities and that institutional power, there is support for early voting sites. Now we look at kind of our outside game. So again, those are those very public displays of support. Our advocacy when it comes to outside game falls into two major buckets at the moment. So we first got our media. So that is generating traditional media and it's getting social media coverage. So bringing it back to our action today, we are writing letters to the editor because we want to kick off this public effort by making it clear through the voices of students and Duval residents that y'all want these early voting sites on your campuses restored. And then the second bucket falls within that kind of, when you think of grassroots organizing, the very classic petition signing. So there are nearly 500 individuals that have signed a petition in support of reinstating these early voting sites at UNF and Edward Waters. And this is just a great way to show massive support for an effort. Now, what I did want to share with you all is our talking points, which we will get into a little bit later. But these are the general talking points that you can use in your advocacy work, whether it is with this letter to the editor today, or whether it's talking with a friend about this effort, talking with your family and other advocates. So on that note, I'll just wrap up kind of my talking with, why are we doing this now of all times? The first is we know that the supervisor should actually just follow up on the commitment he made to place and keep early voting sites on these campuses. But second of all, we want to shut down the argument that the public doesn't need or want these early voting sites. We know it is clear from not only the grassroots support that we've demonstrated and the conversations we've had from the student level to the president level of the university that there is ample support for early voting sites. So we want to shut down that argument that that support doesn't actually exist. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it off to Brad, who's going to lead us to talk about the importance of media, letters to the editor, and then we'll get started writing. But I'll stop sharing my screen so you can do that.
Thanks, Ariel. Hey everyone, I'm Brad Ashwell, State Director with All Voting is Local, and we've been working with Campus Vote Project, ACLU, Florida Rising, Black Voters Matter, and a lot of groups on this effort for a while now. So this is exciting to bring you all into it. Share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Let's play from start. Hopefully this works. Looks like it's kind of close. So should have more logos on there really, but I have a few of the key ones. This is our brief letter to the editor workshop. We're going to try to run through this pretty quick. Letters to the editor are pretty simple. So I'm sure some of you have already written them in the past. In a nutshell, I think these are kind of our goals. I think Ariel did a much better job of laying out the specific goals of the campaign, but with the letter to the editor here, I think we're just trying to raise public awareness about the need for more voter access on campuses. We want to make sure Duval's supervisor of elections hears from students, that the students' voices are uplifted, and as well as faculty and anybody surrounding campuses, that they're not just hearing from activists who do this for a living. And we want to just make sure you have the tools to write LTs and feel confident doing that. So here's here's just sort of a why. Why LT? What's an LT? Why write one? It's a short publication. It's usually in response to a specific issue or a specific piece. A lot of times it's easiest to get one placed if you are responding to something that's already written, whether it's another LT or an op-ed or an editorial. One of the benefits of it is it can reach a large audience, versus just posting something on Facebook. It can bring up information that's not in an article. And again, that goes back to responding to something that's written. You might read a piece, read an editorial or somebody else's letter and say, wow, they're really getting this wrong, or, they're really missing this fundamental thing that needs to be made, this point that needs to be made. It can shape, I just realized that's in the way. It can shape press coverage, reporters, editors, elected officials. A lot of folks pay attention to the opinion page. I think it's been the case for a long time. I haven't looked at stats or survey data lately, but for a long time, the editorial page was the most well-read page in newspapers. But a lot of people, that's all to say, a lot of people read them, and it's a quick way to weigh in on an issue, and they're quick to write, ideally. There's sometimes confusion about the difference between an LT and an op-ed. An LT is basically shorter. An op-ed is an opinion piece that's written by somebody not affiliated with an editorial board. Sometimes there's confusion between an op-ed versus an editorial piece as well. An op-ed is more like a commentary from somebody in the public, like an LT. An op-ed is usually longer. It's harder to get published. If you are interested in writing a longer piece, we would all love you to do that. So please contact Ariel or myself or Sam Kudley or somebody in Duval with an organization you affiliate with, whether it be Black Voters Matter, Florida Rising, et cetera. A few best practices. Again, writing in response to something already written will dramatically increase your chances of getting published. You ideally want to do that soon after you've read that piece, ideally within like 24 hours. Your submission should be timely. You definitely want to write a strong opening statement. Like your first line should be something pithy and attention grabbing. Most editors will only read through the first couple of sentences to decide whether it's worth publishing. So again, that first sentence is important. Avoid passive language. There's a couple of examples there. I'm sure you've had this beaten into your head by every English teacher since you've been in school. No acronyms or jargon. This is a big one that I see a lot of people make a mistake with. You can't assume that people know what the acronym is, and it's frustrating because it takes up your word count, but you really need to do it. Because not only will someone not know what the acronym means, but they could confuse it with something else that it could equally mean. So that's important. Keep them short, usually 200, 250, 100 is even better if you can be really short and straight to the point. Make only one point. That's something that people commonly make, the mistake of trying to fit too much in. And try to keep the tone balanced and default to logic to make your arguments rather than screaming in all caps or exclamation points. And include a call to action, for example, call or write your legislators. And I think the last point here is probably the most important. Write in your own words. Editors are more likely to publish a letter if it's personalized and it's clearly coming from you and you're clearly in their community. When you're submitting the letter to the editor, make sure the email subject line grabs their attention. I think we've already covered that next bullet. This actually is a good one. Read your letter out loud before you send it in. That kind of links to that other point about avoiding exclamatory language or overly inflammatory language. If you read it out loud and you find yourself, it just doesn't feel natural, you probably need to tone it down a little bit. One thing I've heard someone say in a previous training was, it's okay to write in anger, but definitely dial it back before you hit send. This is good. Follow up once you've sent in the letter, follow up with an email, just politely asking whether they're going to run it or not. A, it's good to know. B, you could submit it somewhere else if they're not going to run it. Some papers do have an exclusive policy. They will only publish things you're submitting to them. So they may ask you, is this only being submitted to us? And in the last point, some papers have a once a month. It's very common that they have a once a month rule from any particular writer, so that one writer doesn't flood them with letters to the editor every week. Just tips on how to get it placed. Go to the website, find out how to submit it. They usually have tips, and we'll actually go to that in another slide. If you can't find where to submit it, look at the staff list. Usually on the opinion page, they'll have a link where to submit it. Be sure to include your contact information. That's really important. They will want to contact you before they run it to make sure you are who you say you are, and that you are, they'll want to know if you live in the community or not. And again, ask, I just put Ariel, myself and Sam, but there are lots of other people who are willing to help you if you need it. This is, I just pasted this in from the Florida Times Union. So this is an example of the tips. So if you looked on the Florida Times Union's page with their tips for writing letters to the editor, and some of these are kind of unique. Like they actually have a fairly liberal policy as far as the word count. So they allow 350 words. They suggest 200 though. So that's kind of normal. They want you to cite important facts and quotes, avoid personal comments, stick to the issues. These are generally the same, but they're all a little different. So you really do have to go into the publication and look at them before you submit. What to say? This is where it gets fun. Just share your own story or experiences. Don't worry about trying to be an expert. Start by talking about who you are, describe the problem and the solution. Why is it important to you? Why is it important to people like you? I think everybody has a personal story and a reason why they think this is important, particularly voting issues. Ariel went over the talking points, but just to go over some of them again before you go into an exercise where you're writing. We really kind of start from the premise that democracy works best when everyone can participate. Every voter should have access to vote, have equal access to vote, regardless of age, race, where they live, or political party. Providing campus early voting sends a message to young people of Duval that their voice is respected and valued. I think that's key. When Floridians can exercise their freedom to vote, regardless of where they live, work, or go to class, it sends a message that their voice is respected and valued. Campus early voting sites serve not only students, but also the communities they reside in. Again, those stats that Ariel went over, and we can bring those back up if anybody wants to use them for what you're writing, or I think they're actually in the document that we could share. And then I think with Edward Waters University, it's particularly important to emphasize the role that historically, HBCUs play in preparing young people, particularly people of color, to contribute to the nation. And this just, you might not need it, but everybody hits writer's block sometime, or especially when you have a short timeline to write something in. Just go easy on yourself. Clarify your main points. Use anger as fuel to drive you to the computer. These were some that were given to me by other people, but don't get up after you write your first sentence. In fact, don't get up until you first completed your first draft. And by all means, do not Google while you're writing, or get on Facebook or the internet. And I think that's pretty much it. Now you try. I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, so I will set y'all up so that we can write some great LTs. If folks just want to go on camera, if you can, just so I know like we're all on the same page and I can kind of see like facial reactions, that would be great. If you're in a place where you can turn on your cameras. Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm sending this Google Sheet in the chat right now. So folks should open that up. And if I can get like a thumbs up reaction, whether that's the Zoom or in the chat, whatever you want to do. Okay, all right, it's looking like we do this. Okay, so as folks hop on that. So what I want you all to start doing is to fill out your information in the Google Sheet real quick. So you can see the example at the top. So folks should just write in your information if you're writing your letter to the editor. This is so we can track who is writing a letter, and so we can actually provide that feedback to you and make sure that we can submit these letters. That is the point of this tracking system. And if you don't have a particular organization you're with, that's totally fine. You can just put student, you could put faculty member, whatever you want to do there, totally fine. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so it seems like most of you are almost there with all your info. The next thing you're going to do is you want to make a Google Doc for this letter specifically. So if y'all can make a Google Doc right now, change the sharing settings so anyone can edit it on the internet. And then you'll want to throw that link where it says link to LTE. And as folks create that Google Doc, I'm just going to throw in the chat, again, the talking points. Those will be your best friend for this. But again, as Brad said, this is about getting your opinion down. Why does this matter to you? And sticking to that one point of young voters matter, no matter where they live, etc. And I think Sean's resource, Professor Frieder's resource on the op-ed that he wrote earlier, I think is a really, obviously this is longer than a letter to the editor, but I think it provides that context of the personal experience as a professor teaching a course on campus. So I think that is also very helpful along with the talking points. So I see a bunch of docs linked in here. So what y'all should do, I'm going to throw on some music. We are just going to use the next 10 to 13 minutes to get started on these letters. It is okay if you come out of this not with it like fully done. We want to have a starting point so that we can all follow up and say, hey, do you need more help? Or hey, let's read through this together. So folks should get started on your letter. You have the resources. If you have questions in the chat, you throw them in the chat so that we can answer them. But happy writing. And I will put on some tunes. If you have music requests, I can try to take those. Just let me know. Okay. Piano concentration music. Interesting choice, to say the least. Oh yeah, if you want to keep throwing. Okay, I will try my best to find some piano concentration music. Is there something on Spotify? Okay. Helps with brainwaves. I'm just going to play concentration music and call it a day. Okay, so we are going to start to wrap it up from there. But I hope y'all had a good time getting started on your letters and thinking about your perspective of why this particular work is important to you and getting these early voting sites back on campus is important to you. So I will be following up with folks who started writing their letters to just see kind of where you're at in the process so that we can get these submitted as soon as possible. So just look out for a text from me tomorrow to just check in about those letters so I can help y'all out. But I will just share my screen. Oh, sick. Oh, nice job, Sean. So to wrap up, let me get my slides up. There we go. Okay. Okay. So we just want to wrap up with, like I said at the beginning, oh, oops, there we go. Like I said at the beginning, this is not the last event that we will be organizing to build support around restoring these early voting sites on campus. In fact, there are a lot of ways to continue to stay involved with this work. First, I'll just pass it to Sam to talk a little bit about tabling with us at UNF.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I put my contact info in the chat as well if anyone's interested. But I've been tabling at market days at UNF to get folks to sign the petitions we have, or also scan the QR code. I'm pretty sure a lot of you have signed it, so thank you very much. But yeah, I think it's really exciting. It was the same poster that was shown a few slide decks earlier, but I usually try to stay there throughout the morning until about 1 o'clock, when the crowd goes down as people get to class and get to the gym and everything. But it's been really successful. And we were gifted some really interesting and fun ACLU merch. So I'm really excited to have that on the table this week. And I would love your help and support. And I also am planning on having a couple of other days, because I know like market day, like Wednesday mornings, isn't the best for everyone sometimes. So if you are interested in tabling, but just can't table at that time on campus, the student union, just let me know and I can schedule with the, through the correct portals to get us like a table and a couple chairs, and we can go to, the green or like in front of the library. And I also have a lot of those petitions. So if that's something that you would like to talk to your classmates about, like having like, just speaking before class to everyone, or kind of passing around to your friends, just let me know. And I'm happy to share that as well. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sam. And then other Sam Goonley, would you be able to share the link in the chat for folks if they want to sign up? And then two other events that are coming up. First, the ACLU is hosting phone banks to support voting rights. There are shifts to get started Friday as well as next Tuesday. So if you're interested in getting on the phones and talking with folks, that would be an awesome opportunity. And then additionally, an upcoming event, Our Path Forward in Florida through local reform. Sam, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to talk about specifically with those two.
Yeah, absolutely. So some folks may know the legislature is having a special session, and one of their goals is to pass new maps with Jacksonville being in the crosshairs. So it's a really great time to make these calls. They're your Know Your Voting Rights phone banks. And if folks want to join, we'll be reaching out to folks both here in Jacksonville as well as Orlando, which is the other area that they want to crack and essentially deny the opportunity for there to be Black representation congressionally, and then anywhere in the state north of Palm Beach if this plan goes through. So would love y'all's help. If you join, we hang out on Zoom and walk folks through the whole thing. It's a really great list of ACLU members who are just really pleasant and always eager to get activated. And then likewise, our Path Forward in Florida through local reform is a great event that's going to be Thursday, April 21st at 5:30 p.m. So if that's something folks want to join, it's not only the voting rights campaign, but also the criminal justice reform and immigrant rights organizers who will be speaking about the work that they're doing on campuses and in communities across the state to address some of the different attacks on our civil rights and civil liberties that we're seeing through this recent legislative session. So awesome opportunity if you want to hear about what students are doing across the state.
Thank you to both of the Sams. But then there's also the opportunity we host bi-weekly meetings Mondays at 5:30, where we really just focus on, it's our Let Duval Vote calls, where we talk about specifically what is the work happening on campuses, what are the events we want to organize. So if you're interested in not only being a part of events, but helping to plan the events, be part of the strategy and the tactics that we're implementing, those calls are a really, really good opportunity. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen, but again, thank you so much for the folks who attended. I'll be following up about the letters that you started to write so we can get those sent in. But yeah, I mean, I'll stick around if folks have questions or want to talk, but thanks so much for being here. And I'll stop recording.